The world had collapsed, crumbling under the weight of an unexpected terror. Cities once bustling with life were now ghost towns, overrun by the dead. Zombies, mindless and relentless, roamed freely, hunting anything that resembled human life. And yet, despite the overwhelming numbers, a small group of survivors refused to bow to the nightmare that had consumed the planet. In the heart of an abandoned city, a small building stood against the chaos. The survivors had fortified it, using whatever materials they could find to create barricades. Inside, they were silent, each person knowing that the safety they had was temporary. They could hear the moans and shrieks of the zombies outside, echoing through the cracked windows, reminding them of the ever-present danger. Maya, one of the leaders of the group, paced nervously near the window. Her face was streaked with dirt, her eyes tired, but there was a fire in her gaze. The world might be over, but she wasn't ready to give up yet. She had seen too many people fall to this new nightmare. Too many close friends and loved ones turned into the very creatures they now feared. She refused to let humanity fade into the darkness without a fight. Beside her stood Sam, a former soldier who had become an invaluable ally. His stoic face showed the scars of countless battles, but it was his sharp mind and military experience that had kept them alive for this long. Sam leaned on a wall, keeping his eye on a set of maps and makeshift plans for their next move. "Another raid's coming," Maya said softly, her voice grim. "They'll be here in an hour." Sam nodded, his brow furrowing. "We've been lucky so far. The last few times they were distracted, but we can't rely on that forever. We need to act soon." The other survivors, a ragtag group of men and women, children and elders, gathered in the center of the room, awaiting their orders. There was no time for hesitation. Every moment mattered. Maya's voice rang out to the group, steady and calm despite the chaos outside. "We've made it this far, and we're not going to let these monsters win. We need to hold our ground, stay together, and fight. If we're outnumbered, we make the numbers count by using our brains. Stay sharp, keep quiet when necessary, and don't waste ammo." The survivors had heard this speech before. Maya had always been the one to remind them of their humanity, even in the darkest of times. But it wasn't just her leadership that kept them going, it was the sheer determination that radiated from her. Even when all hope seemed lost, she kept pushing, inspiring others to do the same. As the group readied their weapons, makeshift blades, shotguns, and even a few bows, they shared a quiet understanding. They were not a large group. They had no army. But they had their will to survive, and that alone was enough to make them dangerous. Outside, the sun dipped low behind the horizon, casting long shadows over the deserted streets. The undead had a sense of time, or perhaps it was instinct, but they always seemed to come out in waves, drawn by the faintest sound or movement. Their slow, shuffling gait might seem harmless at first glance, but the sheer number of them made them an unstoppable force. Each zombie, though mindless, was part of an army, a force of nature that seemed to grow stronger with every passing day. "We can't let them breach the walls," Sam said, his voice low but serious. "If they do, it's over for us. We have to hold this place until reinforcements arrive." Maya nodded, her eyes scanning the group. She could see the fear in their eyes, but she could also see the determination. These people were ready. They weren't going to give up without a fight. The odds were stacked against them, but they were prepared to make their stand. Not as victims, but as survivors. A distant noise broke through the tension in the room, a faint shuffle, followed by a guttural growl. The zombies were getting closer. Maya's heart pounded in her chest, but she held her ground. "Get into position," she ordered, her voice firm. "We've trained for this. We know what to do." The survivors took their places, positioning themselves behind the barricades, their weapons at the ready. Outside, the growls grew louder, and the sound of shuffling feet echoed off the empty buildings. It was time. The fight for humanity's survival had begun. And even though they were outnumbered, they weren't broken. To them, this wasn't just about staying alive. It was about refusing to let the world fall into complete darkness. They would fight until the last breath, until the last drop of strength. They weren't going to disappear, not without making the zombies pay for every inch of ground they had taken. The first crash at the barricade sent a shudder through the building. The survivors braced themselves. It was only the beginning, and they knew the hardest battles were yet to come. But in that moment, they had one thing that the zombies would never understand: hope. The first wave of zombies crashed against the barricade with a deafening thud. The sound reverberated through the building, making the survivors tense. Their hands gripped weapons tightly, eyes wide with determination, though the fear beneath their steely exteriors was undeniable. Maya stood at the front, her heart racing, but her face a mask of focus. Sam had moved to a corner, watching the barricades closely, ready to spring into action. His military training had prepared him for chaos, but even he knew that a battle with the undead was a different kind of nightmare. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future of humanity. The first few zombies pushed against the wooden planks, their hunger driving them forward. The barricade held, but just barely. It groaned under the strain, threatening to give way. "On my count," Maya whispered, signaling to Sam. He nodded back, adjusting his grip on his shotgun. The rest of the group held their breath, awaiting the moment of impact. 3, 2, 1, Maya counted under her breath. With a forceful kick, the zombies slammed into the barricade again. This time, the wood splintered, cracking in half. The group jumped into action. Sam fired the first shot, the loud bang of the shotgun piercing the air. A zombie's head exploded in a cloud of bloodless gore, sending its lifeless body to the ground. Another survivor, Clara, a former nurse who had proved herself more than capable with a crossbow, took aim and released an arrow into the skull of another undead. It fell, motionless. But more kept coming. Their numbers were overwhelming. Maya ducked behind a table, taking cover and firing her rifle. She shot 2 zombies that had made it past the first line of defense, their heads jerking backward with each precise shot. But there was no time to celebrate. The others were still coming. "We need to push back," Maya said, her voice steady, though her mind raced. "Everyone, move to the next position. Now." They had drilled for moments like this, times when the barricades would no longer be enough, when they would need to rely on quick thinking and even quicker action. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was their only hope. As they moved, Sam noticed something troubling. The zombies weren't just coming from the front, they were everywhere, emerging from alleys, pouring through the streets, their relentless hunger driving them toward the building. It was as if they had been waiting for this very moment. "More are coming," Sam said, his voice tight. "We can't hold this spot much longer." Maya shot him a grim look, understanding the truth in his words. The group had been lucky so far, but the tide was turning. They had to act fast, or they would be overrun. "Let's fall back to the second floor," Maya ordered, pointing toward the staircase. "It's higher ground. We'll have a better vantage point to pick them off." "We move now." Without hesitation, the survivors retreated to the second floor, taking whatever supplies they could carry. The sounds of the zombies crashing against the barricades grew louder with each passing second. They could hear the gnashing of teeth, the scraping of claws against metal. The creatures were relentless. As they reached the second floor, Maya took a quick survey of the room. It was cramped but sturdy, with a few windows offering a view of the street below. They could see the zombies gathering in the streets, walking aimlessly, their groans echoing through the area. The wave of undead was growing larger. The survivors huddled together, breathing heavily, their weapons at the ready. Some of them had lost friends already, but there was no time for grief now. The fight wasn't over. Maya's thoughts raced. If they were to survive, they needed to hold on just a little longer. Reinforcements, if they were coming, would be delayed. They had to rely on their own strength. And there was something else. Maya felt it in her gut. The zombies weren't just randomly roaming. There was a certain order to their movements, a strange coordination. "They're learning," she muttered under her breath. "They're evolving." Sam overheard her. "What do you mean?" Maya shook her head, unsure. "I don't know. But they're not like the ones we've fought before. They're getting smarter. And that makes them more dangerous." As the survivors set up their defensive positions in the second-floor windows, the first wave of zombies reached the base of the building. But Maya had a plan. She had to hope it would work. "We take them down from above," she said, her voice sharp. "Focus on the ones closest. We make every shot count." The survivors took their positions along the windows, each aiming their weapons at the approaching horde below. The time for caution had passed. The fight for their survival was on. The first few zombies were easy enough to pick off, an arrow here, a shot there, but more kept coming. They needed to be quick, efficient. But then something unexpected happened. A group of zombies gathered under the window, their eyes turned up, as if they were waiting for something. Maya's heart raced. Could they have seen them? Before she could react, one of the zombies reached out with an almost human-like motion, grabbing a nearby pipe and using it to climb toward the second floor. "They're adapting," Sam said, his voice tight with disbelief. Maya's stomach sank. They weren't just outnumbered anymore. They were fighting something smarter. Something that could think. "Get ready," she said, voice strained. "This is only the beginning." The air on the second floor grew thick with tension. The survivors, now spread across the narrow windows, watched in disbelief as the zombies below began to adapt in ways they hadn't thought possible. They were climbing the building. The undead, once thought to be nothing more than mindless, slow-moving creatures, were starting to use tools, pipes, bricks, anything they could find, to scale the walls. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. If they couldn't stop this new wave of intelligence, their small fortress would be doomed. The survivors had been able to hold their own so far, but now, it felt like the ground beneath them was slowly crumbling. "We need to stop them before they reach us," Sam said, his voice sharp with urgency. Maya didn't need to be told twice. "Start taking them out," she ordered, her voice steady despite the fear creeping at the edges of her thoughts. The group opened fire. Arrows flew, bullets rang out, and makeshift weapons were hurled down at the climbing zombies. One by one, the creatures fell, but more kept coming, climbing higher with eerie persistence. Clara, who had been taking out zombies with deadly precision from her corner, glanced over at Maya. "This isn't like the last time. They're coordinated. They're not just wandering around aimlessly anymore." Maya knew Clara was right. The zombies weren't just a mindless mob, they were becoming a threat that was learning, evolving. Every time one of them was taken out, it seemed like another would take its place, more determined than the last. "We have to make a plan," Maya said, pacing back and forth in front of the survivors. "We can't just shoot them down one by one, hoping they'll stop coming. They're like a wave, we need to be the dam that holds them back." Sam, who had been scanning the building's exterior, turned to face her. "There's an old utility room in the back of the building. If we can get to it and barricade ourselves in, we might be able to cut off their climb. But we'll have to act fast. This place won't hold for long." Maya considered the option. The utility room was a risky move, it was small, cramped, and without much of a view. But it might be their only chance. With the zombies closing in, she didn't have time for second thoughts. "All right. We move to the utility room. We make our stand there." The group scrambled into action, grabbing their supplies and weapons, retreating to the back of the building where the narrow hallway led to the utility room. They moved quickly, taking the back stairs and trying to avoid the attention of the zombies that had already reached the second floor. But it wasn't as easy as they had hoped. The undead had already begun to fill the building. Maya could hear their growls echoing in the hallways, the sound of feet shuffling, and the scrape of nails against the walls. They were inside, and they were closing in. "We're not gonna make it," Clara said, panic creeping into her voice as she looked over her shoulder. "Stay calm," Maya snapped, pulling her into motion. "We can still do this. Move." They rushed through the darkened hallway, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Maya led them down to the utility room, but as they neared the door, the sound of zombies behind them grew louder. The creatures were getting closer, too close. "Lock the door," Sam shouted, his eyes wide with urgency. Maya quickly slammed the heavy metal door shut and pushed a nearby cabinet against it. The survivors stood there for a moment, breathless, the sound of the undead on the other side growing louder. But their relief was short-lived. The door trembled under the impact of the zombies outside. It wouldn't hold for long. The utility room wasn't exactly a fortress, it was small, cramped, and barely functional, with only a few rusted pipes running along the walls and a flickering light overhead. Maya paced back and forth, trying to think of their next move. "We need to take them out, now. We can't wait for them to break through." "We'll need to use the pipes," Sam suggested, his eyes scanning the room. "We can block off any entry points, create choke points. If we can keep them in one spot, we can use the environment against them." Maya nodded. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than sitting back and waiting to be overrun. "All right, let's get to work. We barricade the windows, seal off any other entrances, and take out as many as we can." The survivors worked quickly, grabbing anything that could be used as a barricade, wooden planks, metal bars, anything heavy enough to block the door and the few broken windows. Sam helped reinforce the pipes along the walls, using his military training to craft a makeshift defense that could hold back the initial wave. Clara and Maya stood guard by the door, keeping watch as the first zombie slammed into the metal. The door creaked under the pressure, but it held, for now. The group was working fast, but their time was running out. The zombies were relentless, and the room was filling with a sense of doom. It wouldn't be long before the door finally gave way, and once it did, they would have to fight for their lives in a confined space. There would be no escape. As Maya finished setting up the final barricade, she felt a sense of determination surge through her. They were outnumbered, but they weren't broken. Not yet. "We've got this," Maya said, her voice low but full of resolve. "Stay focused. We fight, and we fight smart." The first zombie finally broke through the door, and the battle was on. They would fight tooth and nail to protect what little hope remained. The moment the door finally gave way, the sound was deafening. The metal door buckled under the weight of the zombies crashing against it, and then it splintered, sending a wave of dust and debris into the small utility room. The survivors braced themselves, weapons raised and ready to face the oncoming horde. The first zombie stumbled through the shattered door frame, its arms outstretched, eyes glazed and hungry. Maya shot it in the head before it could even take another step. Its body crumpled to the floor, lifeless. But that was just the beginning. More followed, one after another, like a relentless tide, each one clawing and stumbling their way toward the survivors. Sam fired his shotgun with deadly precision, each blast sending a zombie crashing to the floor. The force of the weapon's recoil sent a shock through his body, but he didn't flinch. The next shot was already lined up, ready to fire. Clara was on the other side, expertly using her crossbow to pick off zombies from a distance. The twang of the bowstring was sharp and quick, each shot hitting its mark with deadly accuracy. But there were too many, and the space was getting smaller with each passing second. The survivors had no choice but to fight, their backs to the wall. The utility room, once a place of refuge, had become a battleground. They had created a small barricade, but it wasn't enough to stop the zombies from flooding in. The group had to move quickly, using every inch of the room to their advantage. Maya's mind raced as she looked around. There had to be something they could use, something to slow the zombies down, something to give them an edge. Her eyes flicked to the rusted pipes lining the walls. They were sturdy enough to hold, but they weren't going to stop the undead forever. Sam! Maya shouted over the noise of gunshots and zombie groans. We need to make a path through to the back exit. Get to the pipes, we can use them to funnel the zombies into a tighter space. Sam nodded without hesitation. He understood what she meant. The pipes would create a choke point, making it harder for the zombies to swarm them from all directions. Clara, cover me. Sam shouted, moving toward the pipes. Clara responded immediately, firing another bolt into the oncoming horde. Her eyes never wavered as she kept the zombies at bay. The pressure was mounting, but they couldn't afford to lose focus. One mistake could mean the end. Maya was right behind Sam, her rifle raised as she cleared a path through the encroaching zombies. It was an exhausting, endless cycle of shooting and reloading, but they couldn't stop. If they stopped, they'd be overrun. They had to push forward, no matter how tired they were. The zombies were relentless, but the survivors had learned to fight with precision. Every shot, every movement, counted. There were no second chances. They reached the first pipe, and Sam began to work quickly, using his knife to cut through the rusted metal and create a narrow pathway for the survivors to move through. The others helped as best they could, using any tools they could find to reinforce the pipes and create more barriers. As the last of the zombies in the immediate area fell, there was a brief moment of relief. But it didn't last long. The sound of more zombies approaching from deeper inside the building reached their ears. They had only bought themselves a few minutes at best. Maya wiped sweat from her brow and looked around the room. We need to get out of here, now. We can't keep fighting like this. Sam gave her a grim look. The back exit is still blocked. We're going to have to find another way out. Clara lowered her crossbow, her expression tight with frustration. So, what's the plan, then? We can't just keep running from them. We need to take control of this situation. Maya paused for a moment, then made a decision. The roof. We head to the roof. It's our best shot at holding them off long enough to figure something out. The group moved quickly, barricading themselves behind the remaining barriers as the zombies clawed and groaned just beyond their reach. They had created a temporary refuge, but it was only a matter of time before the undead broke through again. Maya led the way, her thoughts racing. The roof was their best chance, it offered the most visibility and potential for escape. But they couldn't afford to be slow. If the zombies reached the top first, it would be a trap, not a sanctuary. As they made their way toward the stairs, the building shook again. This time, it was a larger group of zombies, pushing forward from another direction. The sound of breaking windows and tearing wood echoed through the building, signaling the undead's continued advance. We move fast, Maya ordered, urging the group onward. If we don't reach the roof in time, we're done for. They climbed the stairs quickly, each step echoing in the empty building. Sam kept a lookout, his shotgun at the ready. Clara stayed close behind, her crossbow loaded and ready to fire at any approaching zombie. Finally, they reached the rooftop door. Maya kicked it open, revealing the wide, open space of the roof. It was a stark contrast to the dark, cramped interior of the building. For a moment, they stood there, taking in the view. The endless city stretched out before them, eerily quiet except for the moaning of the zombies below. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The horde was closing in, and there was nowhere to run. But they had the high ground. They could fight. They would survive. They had to. We hold the roof, Maya said, her voice unwavering. No matter what. We fight. We hold them off. We survive. The survivors took their positions on the rooftop, their weapons ready. The zombies were getting closer, but so was their resolve. They weren't out of options yet. The battle for survival was far from over, but they would not give up. Not without a fight. The roof was their last chance. The skyline stretched out before them, empty and vast, but the growing swarm of zombies below signaled that their time was running out. The survivors had no illusions left. They were outnumbered, trapped, but not defeated. Not yet. Maya stood tall, scanning the horizon as the others positioned themselves. The wind was sharp, cutting through their clothes, but the chill in the air did little to dampen their determination. She could feel her pulse racing. It wasn't just fear, it was adrenaline, the last bit of hope pushing them to fight. "We've got limited ammo," Sam said, his voice calm, but his eyes reflecting the pressure. "We need to make every shot count." Maya nodded. "We hold this position. No one moves unless I say so. We have the height advantage, and that's our edge." The zombies were gathering in the streets below, their groans and moans rising up like an ominous wave. They weren't just aimless wanderers anymore. They were coordinated, learning. Maya could see it now, their numbers were overwhelming, but their minds were still primitive. If the survivors could exploit that, they might have a chance. Clara stood beside Maya, loading her crossbow. She didn't speak, but her eyes were fierce, ready for the fight ahead. Sam, on the other hand, was already checking the few remaining supplies they had left, ensuring nothing was wasted. Maya took a deep breath and turned to the group. "This is it. We make our stand here, or we don't make it at all. Keep an eye on the sky, too. If there's a helicopter or any movement in the distance, we might be able to signal for help." "Signal for help?" Sam gave a short, bitter laugh. "We're more likely to signal our own death." Maya's lips tightened, but she didn't argue. Sam was right, they were on their own now. No more hope of rescue. No more plans. Just survival. She took her position at the edge of the roof, her rifle steady in her hands. The first wave of zombies appeared, stumbling out from alleys, dragging their limbs as they moved toward the building. They were slow, but they never stopped. Each step they took brought them closer to their prey. "Wait for it," Maya muttered under her breath, her focus locked on the approaching horde. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears as she prepared for the first shot. Then, it happened. A zombie at the front of the group lunged forward, its arms reaching desperately. Maya pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, sharp and precise. The zombie dropped, a clean hit to the head. The others were immediately drawn to the sound, a few stumbling forward while others lingered, confused. "Keep firing," Maya commanded. Sam took aim and fired his shotgun, knocking down 3 more zombies with a single blast. The ground shook with each shot, but it was necessary. They were thinning the herd, but they couldn't afford to waste any shots. Clara released another bolt from her crossbow. It struck one zombie in the chest, taking it down, but the next one surged forward in its place. The swarm was relentless. Time seemed to blur as the survivors fought. The rooftop became a battlefield, each shot they fired a desperate attempt to hold back the advancing horde. Every time they took one down, another took its place. The tide was unyielding. Clara shot another bolt into the swarm, and Sam fired his shotgun again, but they were running low on ammo. Maya could see the growing panic in their eyes. They were running out of options, and they needed to think fast. "Plan B," Maya shouted, trying to be heard over the noise. "Get to the other side of the roof. We can use the drop-off to our advantage." Without waiting for a response, she turned and sprinted to the other side of the rooftop, where a fire escape ladder hung just beyond the edge. It was risky, too risky, but it was the only way. They couldn't stay in one place any longer. The survivors followed, Sam covering the rear as they ran. The sound of the zombies' footsteps grew louder, closer. They weren't just coming, they were nearly upon them. Maya reached the ladder first and started to climb down, her hands gripping the metal rungs as she descended as quickly as she could. Below, the zombies were already gathering, looking up at the survivors with their hollow, hungry eyes. Once Maya hit the ground, she turned quickly to see the others following. Clara, with her crossbow slung across her back, was next. Then Sam, last but not least, gritting his teeth as he made the final descent. They were on the ground now, surrounded by the encroaching horde, but for a brief moment, they had a sense of space, of room to breathe. But it wouldn't last long. "We move now," Maya ordered, her voice urgent. "Head down that alley. There's an old parking garage about a mile from here. We can hold up there for a while." "Do you think it's safe?" Sam asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "Do you think we're safe anywhere?" Maya's eyes flicked toward the growing swarm, her mind racing. "No, but we don't have any choice." They moved quickly, ducking into an alleyway, trying to stay out of sight as the zombies surrounded the building they'd just vacated. For the first time in hours, they managed to get some distance between themselves and the horde. But as they ran, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a temporary reprieve. The world they had known was gone. The creatures that had once been human were learning, evolving, becoming more of a threat than ever before. But Maya and the others weren't broken. Not yet. They would fight, they would survive, and they would never give up. Not until the end. The survivors moved swiftly through the narrow alleyways, their hearts pounding in sync with the hurried steps. The once peaceful city had turned into a wasteland, and the chase was relentless. Maya could hear the distant growls and moans of the zombies as they closed in on the survivors, hungry and unstoppable. The alley they were navigating was littered with debris, broken glass, overturned trash cans, and scattered pieces of furniture. The remnants of a world that had once been full of life now lay in ruin, a stark reminder of the chaos that had descended upon them. "Keep moving," Maya urged, glancing over her shoulder. Sam was already several paces ahead, his shotgun held tightly in his hands. Clara, with her crossbow slung across her back, was keeping pace with them, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any potential threats. They had to keep moving. The parking garage was their only hope for a temporary refuge. But the question remained, how long would it hold out against the growing number of zombies that were surely tracking them? "Almost there," Maya muttered, trying to quell the rising sense of dread. The street ahead was clear, and they would need to cross it to reach the garage. But they had no time to waste. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed behind them. Maya froze, her instincts kicking in. The sound was unmistakable, the zombies had breached the barricade at the building they had just fled. "They're coming," Sam said, his voice tense. "We have to go faster." Maya didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted across the street, the echoes of the pursuing horde growing louder with each step. As they reached the parking garage, Maya looked up to see the large metal gate that served as the entrance. It was half open, just enough to squeeze through. "Go, go, go!" Maya shouted, pushing herself forward as she reached the gate. Clara was the first to slip through, her crossbow still in hand. Sam followed closely behind, and Maya was right behind him. But just as she was about to step inside, she heard a voice call out from behind. "Maya!" She spun around, her heart racing as she saw a lone survivor stumbling toward them. It was Ethan, a man they had met weeks earlier during one of their supply runs. He had been part of a small group that had been separated from them during an earlier encounter with the zombies. "Ethan!" Maya exclaimed, relief flooding her chest. "What are you doing here? Are you alone?" Ethan's clothes were torn, and his face was covered in dirt and blood, but he was alive. He didn't answer right away, his eyes darting around nervously. The zombies were closing in quickly, their growls growing louder as they got closer. "I need to get inside," Ethan said urgently, reaching for the gate. "Please, let me in. I don't want to die out here." Without hesitation, Maya grabbed his arm and pulled him through the gap in the gate, just as the first zombie reached the edge of the parking lot. They all stumbled into the relative safety of the garage, the heavy gate slamming shut behind them with a deafening clang. For a moment, there was silence. No growls, no moans, just the sound of their ragged breathing as they tried to catch their breath. "We can't stay here long," Sam said, his voice low. "We need to find higher ground or something defensible. The garage might not hold for long." Maya nodded, wiping the sweat from her brow. They couldn't afford to relax. The zombies were closing in, and every second they spent in one place was another second they risked being overwhelmed. "We'll find a way up to the roof," Maya said. "But we need to regroup." "Ethan, what happened? Where are the others?" Ethan lowered his head, his expression grim. "They're gone. The rest of my group, they didn't make it. I barely escaped with my life. I've been running ever since." Maya felt a pang of sympathy for Ethan, but there was no time to dwell on it. They had to keep moving. "Where's the stairwell?" Clara asked, looking around the darkened garage. Maya pointed toward the far corner of the room. "That way. But we need to be careful. The roof might be the safest option, but if the zombies get in here—" "Yeah, we know," Sam interrupted, his voice firm. "Let's move." They made their way toward the stairwell, taking slow, cautious steps. The dim light inside the garage cast long shadows, and the echoes of their footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. Maya felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, but she refused to let it break her resolve. They had made it this far, and they would keep fighting. No matter what. As they reached the stairwell door, Maya paused for a moment, listening. She could hear the faint sound of zombies, still shuffling outside, but there was something else, something more immediate. The sound of something scraping against metal. Her eyes widened in realization. The zombies are trying to break in. Before anyone could respond, the metal door to the garage rattled violently, as if something, or someone, was trying to force their way inside. Maya's heart skipped a beat. "They're inside the building," Sam whispered. "We have to hurry." Maya didn't wait for another second. She swung open the stairwell door and ushered the others inside. The sound of the rattling door grew louder as the zombies tried to break through, but they were safe, at least, for now. "Move quickly," Maya urged, her voice barely above a whisper. "The higher we go, the better chance we have." The survivors climbed the stairs, the faint sound of the zombies groaning and growling growing more distant as they ascended. But the tension remained, thick in the air. There was no telling how much longer they had before the horde figured out how to break into the garage. They reached the top of the stairwell and found themselves in a narrow hallway. Ahead, another door led to the rooftop. Maya didn't hesitate. She pushed the door open, and the cool night air hit them immediately. The rooftop was vast, offering a wide view of the city below. The moonlight bathed everything in a ghostly glow. But it wasn't the view that caught Maya's attention, it was the sound of the zombies below, still creeping, still hunting. "We can make a stand here," Maya said, her voice steady, even though her heart was racing. "But we have to be ready. They'll be here soon." Sam nodded, his shotgun raised. "Let them come. We're ready." The rooftop was their final chance. There was no going back. The battle was about to get much harder, but Maya and the survivors had no intention of backing down. Not now. Not ever. The rooftop offered a fleeting sense of safety, but Maya knew it was only temporary. The horizon was now a dark void, broken only by the flickering lights of distant buildings and the creeping shadows of the zombies below. They were closing in, relentless in their pursuit. She could feel their presence, like an invisible force pressing in from all sides. Maya scanned the area. The roof was wide, with a few scattered ventilation units and water tanks that could serve as obstacles for the zombies, but there were no barricades, no structures to hide behind. It was open, vulnerable. There was nowhere to go once the horde reached them. "We have to hold them off," Sam said, his voice steady but strained as he reloaded his shotgun. "There's no way we'll be able to outrun them if they get up here. We fight until we can't fight anymore." Maya nodded, her eyes darting between the others. Clara, her crossbow now in hand, was preparing for the first wave. Ethan stood by the edge of the roof, his eyes fixed on the streets below, alert for any sign of movement. The distant groans and screams of the zombies echoed across the city, a reminder of what awaited them if they didn't succeed. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. This was the point of no return. They had no more options left. "Stay together," Maya said firmly. "Don't separate. We need to make every shot count. If we get surrounded, it's over. Just keep moving. Stay sharp." The first of the zombies began to appear on the edge of the rooftop. They were slow, but steady, crawling up the side of the building using whatever they could, dripping water pipes, loose bricks, even the emergency ladders left by other survivors who had long since fled. It was like watching a tidal wave of flesh, creeping and pushing itself forward. Maya held her breath as the first wave reached the top. Sam took aim and fired, taking down 2 zombies with a single shot. The survivors reacted quickly, firing their weapons at the oncoming horde. The crossbow bolts from Clara's weapon were swift and deadly, each one finding its mark. Ethan, though a bit slower than the others, managed to take down one zombie with his pistol before his hands began to shake with exhaustion. "Don't stop!" Maya yelled over the chaos, her voice rising above the noise of the battle. "Keep them at bay." For a brief moment, they managed to thin the herd. The first wave of zombies stumbled back, only to be replaced by another group. And then another. The rooftop was becoming more crowded, more dangerous, as the zombies continued their relentless push upward. The survivors were running low on ammunition, and the weight of the situation was starting to sink in. Maya could see it in their eyes, their resolve was beginning to crack. But there was no time to stop. They couldn't afford to give up. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed across the rooftop as a group of zombies broke through a section of the rooftop access door, their hands reaching for the survivors. Maya whipped around, her heart racing. They had underestimated the zombies' ability to break through. "We've got company!" Sam shouted, his voice frantic. "Get back!" The survivors quickly adjusted their positions, backing up toward the roof's edge. Zombies were pouring onto the rooftop from both sides now, and there was nowhere to retreat. "Clara, reload!" Maya commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Ethan, get on the other side, cover us." Ethan hesitated for a split second before darting to the far corner of the rooftop, his gun raised. He was slower, but his training kicked in, and he fired at the zombies that had begun to emerge from the shadows, trying to cut them off before they could get closer. The battle was becoming increasingly frantic. With each wave, more and more zombies swarmed the rooftop, pushing the survivors back toward the edge. It was like fighting a tide of death. No matter how many they took down, more would replace them. "We can't keep this up forever," Clara shouted, her voice tinged with panic. "We need a plan. We can't just shoot them all." Maya's mind raced. She scanned the area, desperately searching for anything that could turn the tide in their favor. Her eyes landed on the ventilation units scattered around the roof. There were several large tanks near the edge, and she remembered the propane tanks they had scavenged earlier. "Clara! The tanks!" Maya pointed urgently to the tanks near the edge. "Shoot them! Aim for the tanks!" Clara's eyes widened as she realized what Maya meant. Without hesitation, she loaded a bolt and aimed carefully, her breath steady. The bolt flew through the air and struck one of the propane tanks with a deafening bang. A bright flash of fire erupted from the tank, sending a wave of heat and force across the rooftop. The explosion sent zombies flying in all directions, and the survivors were temporarily shielded by the blast. For a moment, the rooftop was silent, the fireball flickering and casting eerie shadows across the survivors' faces. But the calm was fleeting. The zombies that had survived the blast were still coming, more determined than ever. "We can't stop now," Sam shouted, his voice hoarse. "Keep fighting." Maya felt the pressure building, but she remained focused. "We're not done yet. We can't let them take this from us. We survive, together." With renewed determination, the survivors took their positions again. The rooftop was no longer a place of refuge, it had become their battleground, their last stand against an enemy that refused to relent. They knew they were outnumbered, but they had a secret weapon, each other. And as long as they stood together, they wouldn't go down without a fight. The zombies kept coming, but the survivors held their ground. The battle wasn't over yet, and Maya refused to let it be. The fight for their lives had only just begun. The night seemed to stretch on forever as the survivors fought desperately, each shot echoing across the rooftop. The wind howled through the ruined city, carrying the sounds of the relentless zombies below. Their growls and groans reverberated in Maya's ears as she took quick, steady shots with her pistol, each one knocking down a zombie, but more kept coming. There seemed to be no end to them. The survivors were exhausted. Sweat and blood stained their clothes, and their hands trembled from the strain of constant battle. The ammunition was running low, the crossbow bolts fewer with each shot, and the propane tanks that had provided them with a brief moment of respite were now empty. Maya glanced over at Sam, his shotgun now silent as he reloaded for what felt like the 100th time. His eyes were bloodshot, his face drawn with fatigue, but his resolve never wavered. Clara stood at the edge of the roof, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of salvation, but there was nothing. "We can't keep doing this," Clara said, her voice shaky as she reloaded her crossbow. "We're running out of time. We need a plan. Something. We fight until we can't fight anymore," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We don't give up." As if to test their resolve, a loud crash rang out from the other side of the roof, followed by a chorus of growls. Another wave of zombies had found their way onto the rooftop, climbing up the side of the building like ants. The survivors turned to face the new threat, their backs pressed against the edge of the roof. There was nowhere to retreat, no higher ground to claim. The rooftop had become a trap, a final stand against the overwhelming tide of the undead. Maya's heart raced, but she refused to show fear. "We don't let them win," she whispered to herself, though the words were barely audible over the cacophony of the horde below. Ethan, who had been standing quietly by the corner, suddenly moved with purpose. He was a man driven by something deep within, a spark that had not been extinguished by the horrors they had witnessed. He motioned to the others to follow him. "There's a plan," Ethan said, his voice steady, despite the chaos. "I saw a fire escape on the far side of the building. It's our only chance to get off this roof." Maya turned to him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and hope. "Fire escape? Are you sure it's clear? I saw it from here. It's not far. We can make it, but we have to move fast." There was no time to question him. They had no choice. The zombies were closing in from all sides, and the roof was no longer safe. This was it, the last chance. "Let's go!" Maya shouted, urgency filling her voice. She ran toward the far side of the roof, the others following closely behind. The fire escape was a narrow metal ladder, rusted with age and barely hanging on the side of the building. It was a risky escape, but it was the only way out. The zombies had reached the other side of the rooftop by now, and their numbers were overwhelming. The survivors had little time to waste. Maya reached the ladder first, grabbing hold of the cold metal. She glanced back to see Sam and Clara close behind, weapons raised and ready for whatever came next. "Ethan, too, was right on their heels. "Clara, cover us," Maya ordered as she began to climb. Clara nodded and aimed her crossbow, shooting bolts into the advancing zombies that were making their way toward them. The sharp twangs of the crossbow were drowned out by the growls and shrieks of the undead. But Clara's shots were precise, knocking down the zombies that would otherwise have blocked their path. "Keep going," Sam urged, his voice tight with tension. Maya climbed the fire escape as quickly as she could, her hands slipping from the metal with each desperate movement. The ladder rattled beneath her weight, and the sound of the approaching zombies grew louder with every second. She could hear them, their heavy footsteps echoing across the roof as they closed in. At the top of the fire escape, Maya reached for the rooftop access door. It was locked, but she kicked it with all her strength, the door splintering with a loud crack. She slammed it open and scrambled inside, pulling herself up into the building. Behind her, the others followed, each of them scrambling to get to safety. Sam was next, pulling Clara up behind him, and finally, Ethan slipped through the door just as the zombies reached the base of the fire escape. Breathing heavily, Maya stood up and looked around. They were inside a hallway, dark, quiet, and abandoned. There was no sign of other survivors, no way to know if this building was safe. But they had made it out of the hellish rooftop, and for now, that was enough. They huddled together in the hallway, their backs to the wall as they tried to catch their breath. The sound of the zombies outside was distant, but they knew it wouldn't last long. The horde would keep searching, keep coming. But for now, they had bought themselves some time. Maya's eyes met each of theirs. They were battered, bruised, but alive. That was all that mattered. They had survived the impossible, outnumbered and nearly broken, but they were still standing. "We made it," Maya said, her voice hoarse but strong. "We're still alive. And as long as we keep fighting, they won't take that from us." The group nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. The battle wasn't over. The world had changed, and survival was no longer guaranteed. But as long as they had each other, they had a chance. They turned and began moving down the hallway, ready to face whatever came next. There was no clear path ahead, no easy way out. But they were alive, and that meant they could keep fighting. Outnumbered, but not broken. They would refuse to disappear.